The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome into the new Boston studio in its iteration number 1. Lewis is here. I am here, but there is just too much news to talk about right now to spend too much time on the studio. So we'll talk about that more on the bonus show. You probably heard Friday night, series of coordinated terror attacks in Paris, also including the northern suburb of Saint-Denis. ISIS has already taken responsibility. This was a combination of mass shootings, suicide bombings, non-suicide bombings, I guess old-fashioned bombings is what we call them, hostage taking, 3 separate explosions, 6 mass shootings, and a standoff with police. Horrific, Lewis. I don't think there is any other word for it.
Yeah, I was, of course, I was listening, I was watching, and my reaction was really similar to my reaction from 9/11 in a way, you know, just a large-scale attack and something you just really don't expect to see.
The details of it, the first attack beginning shortly after 9 p.m. local time, reportedly ending just before 1 a.m. Early Saturday morning. So far, we know that at least 129 people were killed, somewhere around 8 attackers were killed, and over 350 people injured. A state of emergency was announced in France. This put temporary controls at the borders. First citywide curfew since 1944. The death toll of 129, Lewis, makes these the deadliest attacks in France since World War II. Motive. Why France? Why at this time? The motive is speculated to be possibly retaliation by ISIS for the French role in the Syrian civil war and the Iraqi civil war. And French President François Hollande has stated that this was a combination of ISIS from abroad working in concert with what they're for now describing as internal help. And I think when you see this level of coordination, I don't think it's surprising to anybody that internal help was probably a factor.
That was my first thought. I thought that clearly this is a group that has been in France for a long time. You know, you go on Facebook, and I'm sure everyone has seen people saying, oh, you know, are you still happy with the immigration, you know, letting refugees in? Look what's happening. Well, if there was not internal help, I would be very surprised.
If we are to believe that the Russian Metrojet plane crash was an ISIS bomb, ISIS claiming responsibility for that, then we do have the possibility here of a factual, non-hyperbolic reality that ISIS is becoming increasingly belligerent, expanding their terroristic reach into plane bombings, coordinated mass casualty attacks in Europe. This was not a lone wolf in Paris, Lewis. This was, I hesitate to say this, but close to a military operation that we saw. This is serious, and at the same time, what should the reaction be? We have to remember that this is not a lone wolf attack. We are talking here about a group in ISIS that is increasingly expanding its actions beyond its own borders, beyond its limited strongholds that it has had in Syria, less so in Libya, in Iraq. And I really don't know what the answer is, but my sense is that we may be seeing a more coordinated response from militaries than we have seen so far, than we have seen in a while.
Well, not really just a response. I mean, I think this should and it will make the world reevaluate the threat of ISIS. And I've said before that I think we need to be more firm with ISIS, and well, this is proof of that.
And this is also bringing up new questions about, for a while we've been talking about, yes, the U.S. decision to go into Iraq was responsible for creating the vacuum in which ISIS was created in the first place. At the same time, how far does that responsibility take the United States, given that we have not seen ISIS be a direct threat to the national security of the U.S. within foreign soil? Of course, many Americans in Paris all the time, traveling, etc. So I think that is now going to show some pushback. We're going to follow it. We'll see where it ultimately goes, and we'll learn more about these attacks. No question about it. Unrelated to the attacks in Paris, but related in a sense, is that the U.S., the Pentagon, has now announced that it has killed the top ISIS operative in Libya, Wisam al Zubaidi. The Pentagon announced that they successfully carried out an F-15 aircraft strike. This is the first time that the U.S. has directly gone after ISIS outside of Iraq or Syria. There was some confusion, Lewis, about this headline. The headline read, U.S. kills ISIS leader in Libya. And the understanding for many people was, oh, the leader of all of ISIS was in Libya when he was killed. What this means is that ISIS is fragmented. The Libyan ISIS leader was killed. This has essentially no impact on the Syrian ISIS leader or the general leader of ISIS, or call it what you want. So some confusion around exactly who was killed here.
Yeah, and forgive me, I could not for the life of me find a picture of this guy, probably because the number one before him was killed, and before him was killed, and before him was killed, and now you have, essentially nobodies who are taking over in leadership positions. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think that ISIS is like officially only operating out of 3 countries, Libya, Syria, and Iraq, right?
That's correct. And Libya is the country where, and many people may not know this, Libya had sort of the most, Libya presented the most problems for ISIS, significant competition for ISIS in Libya. We have a situation in Libya where most of the Muslims are Sunni, meaning that the country doesn't have the same sort of sectarian tension that we see in Iraq and Syria. And in addition, there's the competition of al-Qaeda fighters and unaffiliated local fighters in Libya. So this is news. This was something that, while not directly related to the attacks in Paris over the weekend, felt like a sort of strong headline. But at the same time, we instantly have those who say, number one, the U.S. simply does not have the legal authority to be carrying out this mission. And at the same time, Lewis, we heard from some people that, and if you don't have to look too far on the internet to see examples of this, some people saying, oh, this is obvious propaganda. This is an obvious response to what is going on in Paris, just to make it seem as though the U.S. is competent. The U.S. could not possibly kill this guy. And when people say that, I find it silly that the same people who say the U.S. government is capable of carrying out these massive coordinated conspiracy theories involving the military and media and law enforcement, when there's something like Sandy Hook or the killing of Osama bin Laden, they're able to carry out that, Lewis, but at the same time, they can't just kill one guy in Libya. It doesn't really make sense.
Especially considering our drone program. We've been doing this for I don't know, 12, 13 years, successfully taking out targets with drones, and innocent civilians, of course, too. I'm not praising it, but, this is nothing new.
We did have a Democratic debate on Saturday evening. You may not have known that. And a lot of people emailing me saying, David, it's abundantly clear that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC don't really want to promote these debates. It seems that the way to help Hillary Clinton is for people not to really see these debates. But indeed, there was a Democratic debate on Saturday night. Hillary Clinton was attacked big time for her connections to Wall Street and for her foreign policy record. And I want to talk, Lewis, about some of the specific attacks that Hillary Clinton received. Of course, and this was expected, her vote in 2002 to authorize the president to decide about going into Iraq. That's something that Hillary Clinton has been criticized for a long time. Martin O'Malley and Bernie Sanders criticizing her about that. At the same time, Martin O'Malley painted a pretty grim picture of Middle East policy under the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State position, saying Libya is a mess, Syria is a mess, Iraq is a mess, Afghanistan is a mess. And then on domestic issues, both Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley criticized Hillary Clinton for her ties to the financial industry. They argued that her policies wouldn't really rein in Wall Street excesses that were connected to the 2008 financial crisis. And Bernie Sanders saying, let's not be naive about it. Why, over her political career, has Wall Street been the major campaign contributor to Hillary Clinton? And this is fascinating, Lewis. Hillary Clinton offered a response to why it is that Wall Street has been financing her for so long. And her explanation was that the Wall Street companies that donated to her were donating to her essentially because of 9/11, saying at the time of 9/11, she was representing New York City, and that she was there in solidarity with those companies, and that's why those companies supported her, not because her policies are in any way supportive of the banksters, which I think is to make it an understatement, quite difficult to believe.
it's really an insult, right? I mean, when she tells that to the American people, it's an insult because it's not true, Dave. Standing in solidarity together during 9/11 means absolutely nothing to these giant corporations. I just, Dave, to quote, some pundits and Republicans, I just kind of want to wring Hillary's neck when I hear her say this.
So when you hear her give that explanation, it's so bogus to you that it infuriates you and it enrages you and it makes you consider flipping your desk over.
It's beyond obnoxious. And she's also just playing up the patriotism thing, but it's completely fabricated. It's bold. Dave, I hate it.
Let's talk about some of the differences between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders that surfaced from the debate over the weekend. We've been building up our picture of where Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders differ. Another difference has now surfaced. Not that we didn't know about this one, but this may be the first time from a debate that it actually came up. Bernie Sanders said, "I want to end the international embarrassment of the United States being the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a right, not a privilege." What did Hillary Clinton, Lewis, say about health care? Hillary Clinton said, "I think as Democrats, we ought to proudly support the Affordable Care Act, improve it, and make it the model that we know it can be." This is a big difference. Remember that the Affordable Care Act, for all of the good things that it does, reinforces the for-profit status quo of employer-connected health insurance. Hillary Clinton says that's the system she likes and she wants to improve it. Bernie Sanders saying single payer is the way. This is a big difference.
Yeah, huge difference. We're with Bernie on this one.
I am with Bernie on this one. Now, there is a pragmatic response to this, which is, David, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton are not going to get single payer passed if they are president. So it actually doesn't matter. It's great that Bernie Sanders would love to see single payer, but you're not going to see single payer. Whoever the next president is, they are not going to pass single payer. And that's a discussion that we'll have in the future. One other difference between Hillary and Bernie that surfaced from the debate: Bernie Sanders very clearly supports a $15 an hour minimum wage. Hillary Clinton saying she supports a $12 an hour minimum wage. This may not have been a good debate for Hillary Clinton, but it may not matter because at this point, depending on which polls you look at, she has nationally a medium to very, very large lead. And the more that the Democratic National Committee can not promote the debates, the better it's going to be for Hillary Clinton. Let's take a break. We're in Boston at the new studio. Plenty coming up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show is funded by our audience through the membership program. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And right now you can get a free 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar with your membership. davidpakman.com/calendar16. Over 65 calendars of our towards our goal of 200 already en route. davidpakman.com/calendar16. If you just want the calendar, you can get it there as well. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can go to davidpakman.com/Amazon and order whatever you like. And Lewis, I know that we have a lot of people who have been streaming Back to the Future through davidpakman.com/Amazon. This is all related to like October 21st, 2015 is a date that appeared in the movie, right? So all sorts of new interest in Back to the Future cropped up a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, people went crazy, and it's a good movie, but especially people that are around our generation, they just love Back to the Future.
Tons of people streaming it. The holiday buying season is ramping up. Remember that if you're going to do any shopping at all on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support our show if you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. I also noticed one person purchased the book The Food Lab by J. Kenji Lopez Alt. I heard about this book last week listening to, it was either a Planet Money podcast or maybe Freakonomics, and it was all about the sort of science of food and scientific explanations for what tastes good and what doesn't. I'm interested in the book, so if you are listening and you're the person who bought that book, let me know if you liked it, because I am thinking of getting it. davidpakman.com/Amazon. Any shopping you do supports the work that we do. Recent interview that is very, very interesting. Donald Trump was interviewed and asked about Ben Carson and some of the things Ben Carson has said, some of the things Ben Carson has written, etc. And Donald Trump decided to sort of compare Ben Carson to a child molester. Now, I can't really do justice to the incredibly nuanced and interesting way in which Donald Trump drew a correlation between Ben Carson and a child molester. So I'm going to play the clip for you from the Aaron Burnett show. Let's listen to Ben Carson being being sort of equated to a child molester by Republican candidate Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, I like him. I get along with him very well. I just don't know. And don't forget, this is in his book. I'm not bringing up anything that's not in his book. And, you know, when he says he went after his mother and wanted to hit her in the head with a hammer, that bothers me.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty bad. When he says he's pathological, and he says that in the book, I don't say that. And again, I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything other than pathological is a very serious disease. And he said he's pathological. Somebody said he has pathological disease. Other people said he said in the book, and I haven't seen it, I know it's in the book, that he's got a pathological temper or temperament. That's a big problem because you don't cure that. That's like, you know, I could say, they'd say you don't cure, as an example, child molester. You don't cure these people. You don't cure a child molester. There's no cure for it. Pathological, there's no cure for that. Now, I didn't say it. He said it in his book.
Yeah. So if you were playing buzzword bingo during that interview with just the words pathological and cure, you'd be wasted by now, Lewis, if you were playing a drinking game with that. My immediate thought when I saw this was not that there's anything really that interesting in it, other than that infighting among the two Republican leading candidates is a good thing.
Yeah, it is. And Donald Trump is continuing to make outrageous comments. My first thought when I saw this was that whatever he's doing in a tanning booth is looking really strange. He's got this, his eyes look like they're about to, 20 shades lighter than the rest of his face. And it's kind of scary.
Yeah, no, the physical, I don't care. I don't use physical appearance to determine whether someone is a good candidate or not. But Donald Trump's physical appearance here, where his lips and his eyes are not tan and everything else looks like more orange than John Boehner, it is downright bizarre. But to the comments, Ben Carson said when he was younger he had a pathological temper. Now that may have been a lie because most of the stories that CNN has tried to verify from Ben Carson's youth, they've not been able to verify a single one of them. But he never said he was pathological or had a pathological disease, as Donald Trump is talking about here. The more and more that Donald Trump and Ben Carson get involved in a combination of bizarre lies and childish attacks, the more Marco Rubio is going to have a shot at being the nominee.
Yeah, you'd imagine that, I hate to call him a real candidate, but you'd imagine that Rubio should be the guy in this mess of the GOP. But let him go at it.
The other thing that every day is helping Marco Rubio is not only infighting between Donald Trump and Ben Carson, but also Jeb Bush continuing to be a non-factor. And for all the criticisms of Donald Trump referring to Jeb Bush as a low-energy guy, it is really actually insightful in the sense that when I see Jeb Bush talk, and the new thing is Jeb can fix it, whatever, his speeches, they trigger nothing in me emotionally. I see it and I go, I don't even really get very angry with the dumb stuff he says because he's just so low energy. I don't even know that he cares about what he's saying.
Yeah, it doesn't really help. You look back at McCain, and McCain had great energy, right?
To some extent.
Yeah, I just think he just, I don't know how else to say it. I think he had a bit more energy, and I think I could see how he fired up people a bit more. Jeb is just, he's doing nothing.
We've talked about Hillary Clinton and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We've also talked in the last week about the Trans-Pacific Partnership itself, which we've now gotten a look at the full text of. I got an email from a viewer saying, hey, David, in case you haven't seen this recent video with Hillary Clinton addressing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, here are some of the details. On CNN, Hillary Clinton was asked if she would use her political leverage to convince Democrats in the Senate to kill the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She flat out said, no, I'm going to state my position, which I have. The journalist pressed her and said, well, will you lobby against TPP? And she said, no. Let's take a look at the video and then we'll discuss.
As a leader in the Democratic Party, are you going to use some of your leverage to convince some Democrats not to vote for the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement?
No, I'm going to state my position, which I have.
And you're not going to lobby one way or the other?
No, and I think that it's appropriate for the congressional leadership and members of Congress and the administration to battle that out. If they want to know what I think, I'm more than happy to tell them. I've come out against it because I don't think it will meet the test I've set, which is to create more good-paying jobs and raise incomes for Americans and further our national security. And it's particularly challenging when you have lost jobs, as I believe we have, to currency manipulation, and that is not embedded in the agreement. It's in a side agreement. It's not enforced.
Okay. Is there a criticism here? I mean, yeah, I get it. She says she's against it, and Hillary Clinton saying or saying she's for or against TPP has been a big thing where we're like, well, so 45 times as Secretary of State, she said stuff that seemed to be sort of in favor of TPP, but now she's against it, but she's not going to lobby anyone to vote against it. There are lots of things that candidates state positions on, but don't actively lobby for or against, right? I mean, Donald Trump wants a wall. He's not currently lobbying members of Congress to build the wall. The difference, though, is TPP is moving forward in a way that the wall isn't. TPP impacts 40% of the world economy in a way that the hypothetical wall wouldn't. So is there a criticism here of Hillary Clinton where she says she's against it, but she won't actually try to do anything about it?
Well, I guess that depends on what you think the president's job is.
Well, but not the president. As candidate to president, should she be, in addition to campaigning and saying, one of my presidential campaign things is I'm against TPP, should she, as former senator, former secretary of state, one of the most well-known politicians in the United States at this point, should she be actually trying to stop TPP?
But she's not in a position to. She's just running a campaign. She's just the person running a campaign.
Her position is everybody knows who she is. And if she is the leading candidate to be the Democratic nominee, you think Democratic senators will ignore her if she shows up and says, listen, I'm running against a campaign where I'm against TPP, but you can vote against it right now. She would have influence.
She might. But to answer your question, yes, I think senators would ignore her. Quite honestly. And so while I wish she would, because we don't want this deal to happen, I'm not going to fault her for this. I just don't think it's her responsibility.
I am going to be speaking after the break to former Republican Congressman Bob Ney, and we're going to talk to him about the presidential campaign. We're going to talk to him as a Republican that I see as very, very reasonable. And he happens to be a Republican who spent time in a federal prison for corruption. And he still is way more reasonable than all of the current Republican candidates. We're going to talk to him about how he sees this race. What does he see is going on with the infighting in the Republican Party? What does he see as the future of the Republican Party with regard to retrograde positions on social issues? Bob Ney will join me next, and we will talk to him. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Louis Motamedi. And of course, Louis, that's LOUIS MOTAMEDI. You got to get the whole thing. You got to get all those letters in there. But you will find Lewis on Twitter.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined again by former Ohio Republican Congressman Bob Ney, who represented Ohio's 18th congressional district from 1995 until 2006, when he resigned after pleading guilty to charges of conspiracy and making false statements in relation to the Jack Abramoff Indian lobbying scandal. Bob was sentenced to 30 months in prison, ultimately served 17. He's also the author of the book Sideswiped, Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill. It's so great to have you on. And, you and I have talked about some of the areas where, since your departure from the U.S. House of Representatives, you've started to differ from Republicans. Talk to us broadly about how you see this Republican primary that's playing out right now. Do you feel that your views are represented among the, I guess now it's around 15 candidates that remain?
Parts of them are scattered, David, across the candidates. I must say, I think this is one of the strangest elections probably in modern American history. It's going to be. But when you look at the crowd, most likely I would have a lot of views that John Kasich would share, not union views, because I was a very pro-labor Republican, which, by the way, there were 50 of us that always supported prevailing wage, supported minimum wage increases. That element of the party seems to be gone. Most of us are gone from there. But Kasich does have some points of view, I think, that are balanced. Now, playing to the crowd, however, that's not going to get him anywhere, and it didn't the other night. I mean, in other words, he had to be honest, but with that crowd, it's not going to do well for him. Although, if you look at Trump, Trump in himself is not towing the complete right-wing line. He's staked out positions, immigration, for example, but on some other things like Russia and what to do with Russia, he hasn't staked out that right-wing line. Ben Carson, frankly, David, I can't follow where he's at. Honestly, I mean, I'm trying. This is not trying to slam him personally, but where does the appeal come from? I mean, so you have Trump and Carson at the top of the food chain, not the standard Cruz, Rubio, Rand Paul, Kasich, the office holders, but you've got these other two people, and I'll put Fiorina in there to an extent, that are on the outside. So I think that's dissatisfaction by a lot of Republicans with the current situation in the Congress. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't go to the right enough. I think it means that they don't know where they want to go in that Congress. And a lot of that was due, obviously, to the horrific failure of leadership of John Boehner and the stale, same old Mitch McConnell. And a lot of Republicans feel that way. So it's not even breaking down anymore, David, into right or left, as much as it's breaking down to trying to follow where on earth some of these candidates really are.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you that John Kasich has been the guy that I don't agree with him on everything. He's a Republican and I'm not, but he's the guy who to me seems the most connected to reality in terms of sort of pragmatic ideas, in terms of how you can govern. And I agree with you that I don't share his views when it comes to organized labor and unions. He just seemed to really not do well in the last debate. He was attempting to sort of aggressively insert himself in rebuttals, and it didn't go particularly well for him. And another thing people have emailed me about is whenever the camera catches Kasich when he's not speaking, he has these unfortunate sort of facial tics and he looks sort of uncomfortable up there, and that some of the optics of Kasich probably aren't helping him. But I think Kasich, and although I don't agree with him on many issues, Rand Paul was also saying things with regard to the sort of efficacy of our foreign policy that were also resonating with me.
Well, and that's right. And they were being practical. I mean, look, for matters of disclosure, David, go back to 1994 when I ran, and I could actually name my five, by the way. I wouldn't repeat commerce twice like Ted Cruz. But we had, back in 1994, we're going to close the Department of Commerce. We're going to shut down the Department of Education. We're going to shut down HUD. We had our five, personas out there, the mantras that we had. Ted Cruz is still on that. Even with Republicans, that stale old leadership. So, you're looking at this. Kasich gave, I think, a practical approach. But again, and by the way, I wanted to address the facial tics because I was asked on a show yesterday. I do radio every week. I've known John Kasich for years. He actually has done that for years, but now he's before a national audience. So it's kind of a habit he has. But if you don't know him, you're kind of like, is he nervous? What's up with that?
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
So I'm curious about your thoughts regarding some of the ideas that have become prevalent among this Republican primary, ideas that may be with regard to climate change, ideas on social issues, etc. The Republican Party likes to say it's a big tent party. There's no litmus test for being in this party. So you have someone like Donald Trump who wants to raise taxes on the richest of all Americans. You have individual candidates with ideas that may not fit so obviously with the Republican platform. But at the same time, you have very, very extreme ideas on social issues. Is this a good thing for a Republican primary, or is this a problem in your mind?
I think it's a problem, but let's look at something. This fascinates me. Look, in the old days of Karl Rove, when you want to make sure your candidates win, you pull out God, guns, and gays.
Right.
Those are the three things you do. Now the gay issue is gone. I mean, even Trump and Bush, have addressed that. Not for all the candidates. But the candidates that are still insistent on making this the engine that drives the Republican Party are sitting at the kiddie table. Lindsey Graham, you've got Rick Santorum, Huckabee, who wants to use National Guard to arrest everybody, including starting with the gays first. But that whole group, they're at the kiddie table. So it shows you there's some issues that are now gone for the most part. They still resonate a little bit, but they're kind of gone. But as far as the economic issues, et cetera, I think that the extreme thinking is just not going to work. They're going to have practical solutions how to get out of this debt problem. The other thing that has to be dropped, I think, because of the wide variety of independents that really choose presidents now, is the fact of trying to pretend that you can just be one monolithic party that just beats the living heck out of the other side. Somebody's got to admit that there has to be, a hand given out, and some people have to work together, even as we did in an unbelievable way. When you look back at the Gingrich years, it looked like a honeymoon compared to the Boehner years with the White House. So I think there's got to be somebody that's got the guts to come out. Don't be so right wing that we just think we can do it our way. Because when we do that, we as a Republican Party come to the fight with a knife versus everybody else that has a gun.
What's your thought on some of the tax plans that have been presented by the candidates? And I'm thinking first and foremost of Ben Carson and Donald Trump. Ben Carson has this biblical tithe-based plan where everyone pays the same percentage. An analysis was done. It would explode the deficit. He's questioned about it in the CNBC debate, and he says, well, the analysis is bogus because the economy would do so well that we would make up for it. Donald Trump, similar idea. Analysis is done. It would add who knows how many hundreds of $billions to the deficit. He says, no, because the economy will expand so much, we'll make it up, which to me is such a cop-out answer because it says, no, we can't even do an analysis because my tax plan is so good. Is that a problem for you? Do you think that some of these tax plans fall apart when you get to that question?
It's a huge problem. One of the biggest frustrations I had, and I've watched all the debates because I report on them, was sitting there, having been in the room with John Kasich, with the doors closed, and Kasich pointing his finger at the Republicans and saying, hey, corporate welfare's got to go too, I wish John, would bring out those lines that he used at that time. There is a way to get through these things. There were 5 balanced budgets with Clinton and a Republican Congress. Those days are long gone. If we want to get extreme and do the gaga, tax relief, I'm going to lower your taxes for, quote, working people, but yet the top of the food chain really gets the tax breaks. People aren't dumb to that. They're going to see through it. So I'm very, very worried that there is not a substantive policy format for practically getting, in a practical way, getting out of this mess, David. There's got to be something. And I think it was lacking there.
Who do you think will ultimately be the Republican nominee?
Okay. First of all, Jeb Bush would have done better to have belched the ABCs and tap dance on stage for votes. He'd have got more votes than what he got. Pathetic. In fact, his people said, well, he's reignited. They need some therapy.
Right.
Bush has done it. If his name wasn't Bush and he didn't have $100 million, he'd be at the kiddie table with Santorum and the rest of the crew. He's just finished. He don't want to be there. Now, getting off of Bush for a second, I think that, Rand Paul will not be in the final mix. I think the final mix, when I say final mix, in a few months will be Trump and Carson, Rubio and Cruz most likely will be the final mix. Now, does Cruz make it to the top? I don't know. I do the babysitter judgment on candidates. If you interviewed him, would you want him watching your kids? I mean, what do you think? So there's just something about Ted Cruz. He's just not going to come across.
Oh, there's something, all right.
Yeah. And if it was just right wing, then Rick Santorum would have been the nominee, not Mitt Romney. And I want to point that out. So I think the top 3 is going to boil down probably to Carson and Trump and Rubio is what I think. Maybe Cruz will still be hanging in there. I think we might have an open situation going into the convention even.
What I think is interesting about that is I agree with you. I don't think it'll be Cruz. And then when I sit back and think about Donald Trump and Ben Carson, I just can't imagine that ultimately they will be the nominees. And that leaves me with Marco Rubio, who has had 2 consecutive really strong debate performances. And although I think he sounds a little rehearsed and I think he certainly lacks experience, it has been a huge mistake. And I'm wondering if you agree to go after him for this personal credit card and financial thing, because he has such a great answer, which is, yeah, I'm not a multimillionaire like the other candidates. I'm a normal person. And I think it's a bad idea to attack him on that.
I remember Dennis Kucinich, who I served with, being attacked, and I was also attacked because we were the two Ohio members who had some credit card debt. We were attacked for it, and we actually won on that issue. We weren't wealthy enough as the rest to not have credit card debt. And you look at this and you think, where did people come from? And this attack on Ruby on the credit card, I mean, he's answered it. Jeb Bush has been going crazy on it. I think it helped him, actually. I think it was a pretty lame attack, and I think it helped him at the end of the day. I believe he's past that. But this is going to be fascinating. And it obviously, with Trump and Carson at the top, people want the, kind of the outsiders. Bernie Sanders, who I served with for 11 years, he's the inside outsider, if you know what I mean.
Right.
He's gotten popularity because I don't care if he's been there 40 years. Bernie Sanders is a guy that you look at and say, yeah, that guy's kind of outside that madness there in D.C. And so that's what's happened with Carson and Trump. Now, that lasts only so long when you really get down to a general election and you have to start talking about, facts. And that's where both Sanders and Clinton have had a long history. And they, and maybe that's a downside being in D.C., but it's also an upside of knowing when it really cuts to the chase in the general election of how do you get to specifics. So Carson and Trump have become, I think, a modern-day enigma in the Republican Party of two people that have the luxury of beating up the current Republican system.
All right. Bob Ney, former Ohio Republican. Always great to have you on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
This is pretty bad. I'm not any big fan of Neil Cavuto, the Fox News and Fox Business host, or of Fox News or of Fox Business, but I have a clip here where Neil Cavuto did something that I like to do, which is during an interview, you ask really simple questions that just sort of force people to indicate whether they have any clue at all about what they're talking about. A young student named Keely Mullen, who's an organizer for the Million Student March, which is organizing for free public college and cancellation of student debt and a $15 an hour minimum wage for all campus employees. She was interviewed by Neil Cavuto. She was asked a super simple question, which is, okay, here's the list of the stuff you want. How is this going to be paid for? And it did not go well for her, which is really sad because I support most of the proposals she's talking about. I think they're good proposals. And I think there are answers to how it would be paid for. And Bernie Sanders has talked about that. Brace yourselves. I really do feel bad for her. Stick with this, okay? Let's take a listen.
So what do you want here? What do you want?
Well, so the movement, the Million Student March, is a movement for a more equitable and fair system of education, as opposed to the really corporate model that we have right now. So the three core demands of the National Day of Action are free public college, a cancellation of student debt, and a $15 an hour minimum wage for people who work on the campus.
And how's that going to be paid?
Great question. I mean, so I'm not sure if you're talking on like a national level or at particular schools. I can sort of touch on both. At my university, Northeastern University,
someone asked to pick up the tab. Who would that be?
The 1% of people in society that are hoarding the wealth and really sort of causing a catastrophe that students are facing. I mean, we have a relationship right now where 1% of the population owns more wealth than the 99% combined.
All right, so if the 1%, Keely, if the 1% just had their taxes raised a few years ago back to almost 40%, then to pay for the health care law, they had them raised another few percentage points. Then they had their deductions limited to raise another couple points, where depending on the state or locality, they're pushing over about 50% in taxes. How much higher do you think? How much more do you think they should pay?
I think, enough until we have a system where not 1 in 2 American families are threatened with poverty.
So where do they go? Let's say if you tax them, they're smart folks, these people, these 1% hoarders, right? So if they leave here, then who's going to pay for all this stuff that you want?
If they leave
the country.
I mean, there's always going to be a 1% in the U.S. The U.S. is like the bastion of capitalism and its success, and I think. Do
you think the 1% can pay for all of this?
Absolutely. 85 people in the world hold more wealth than half of the global population.
No, so let's stop it there because it's starting to get bad. There were a couple places where it got bad, right? And the question that often is asked by people like Neil Cavuto is, well, what should the tax rate be on the rich? And that's really the wrong question to be asking. The real approach is, let's talk about the massive accumulation of wealth and income that is happening at the top, and talk about the fact that it doesn't matter if Neil Cavuto says on paper the rates have been increased. The effective tax rate paid by the top 0.1% is not higher than the top 1%, which is not really higher than the top 5%. Once you get into the top 20%, you don't really continue paying a higher effective tax rate. We've looked at the tax numbers. So I think a better approach, Lewis, for Keely would have been, listen, college is basically a necessity to get even a mediocre job, unless you're particularly bright, lucky, born into wealth, or just a total outlier in terms of entrepreneurial ability. That's the reality. Society benefits from a more educated population. We have significant profits in the financial world that are shown to not be stimulative to the economy, and they are concentrating the wealth among the very rich. We are hurting many people through this system. We're going to shut down tax havens for corporations that allow really profitable businesses to pay 0 or negative tax rates. We're going to put in a small but meaningful financial transaction tax, particularly on speculative and risky investments and financing mechanisms. And we're, in concert with this, going to restructure the entire circle that is easy to get student loans, which makes colleges raise their tuition, which makes it so people get even more student loans, and then they're in jobs that don't pay enough wages to pay off the student loans. That's really the approach. I don't think Keely saying, well, the rich will just pay for it all. She was not prepared for this.
No, you got to be prepared when you're going on Fox News. You got to be ready to for this type of line of questioning. And you're right. You outlined, what needed to happen, but above, the most important things are increasing taxes on the 1% and corporate taxation. Some of the biggest corporations are instead of paying anything in taxes, are receiving millions of dollars from us. So, and
again, I think that the question about the rate it's not a good question. It's Neil Cavuto is smart to ask it. I get why he's
even
smart.
Though their rate might be 50% or over, they're not actually paying even close to that.
That's exactly right. As we've shown time and time again, the effective tax rate is very separate. As Warren Buffett has said, he pays a lower effective rate than his secretary. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call anytime. Here's a voicemail I received about our interviews. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. I was hoping that you could get some more of the real controversial interviews. They're always fun to watch, especially when they're longer, and I know you got a lot more freedom with the YouTube channel now. You could put some real nice long interviews on there with some really crazy people. I hope you do. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always split, Lewis. People sometimes write in and they say, David, those crazy interviews with the right-wing nuts, I don't like them. I usually skip those. We don't really learn very much from them. Other people write in and they say, you got to have the Westboro Baptist Church back on. You got to have Carl Gallups back on. You got to have Ray Comfort back on, and the woman who thought that she knew about economics and prophecy and all that stuff. I think the answer is we just need a mix of stuff.
A mix. And we also have people that say sometimes, like have longer interviews,
Right.
Some people like that. Other people say that interview is way too long. You need to condense it. It's all over.
On the bonus show today, what's happening in the new studio? We're in the new studio. As you can tell, not everything is up and running. This television over my right shoulder has nothing on it. That's not going to be the reality indefinitely. The television over Lewis's right shoulder has nothing on it either. That won't be the ultimate reality and final setup. We'll talk about all of that on the bonus show. And we will also talk, as I punch my microphone, we will also talk about Lewis's trip to Greece. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Get the Hatriot Mail calendar for free with your membership at davidpakman.com/calendar16.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.